This is Fam Electric Ghost, and we're live on our Facebook, YouTube, and Twitch channels with Hannah Spanky for the first time. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. I'm excited to have this conversation.
So we want to let everybody know we are on Newsly, which is an iOS app that we're a featured podcast. And if you want to check that out, you can use coupon code GHOST and get 1 month free premium subscription, so you can stop scrolling and start listening. We'll be on Newsly within an hour. So thank you for being on the program. We love to interview all kinds of people. We started off in 2016 with just musicians, and we've branched out to life coaches, shamans, therapists, all kinds of people. So we're happy to have you. I think you're the first sex therapist we've ever had on the show. So this is something that we think our audience, being creative people, musicians, and actors, and all different types of people, can benefit. Anybody in a relationship can benefit from therapy. So
yeah, totally. Very cool.
So starting off with you're an advocate for like authentic happiness, and I'm a big believer in that. And I think you also mentioned that you kind of, one of the things in your questions you like to be asked was, you kind of have to handle being happy within yourself before you can be happy with anyone else, right?
Totally. Yep.
And so maybe you can start at the beginning, because you were in the sex industry, and then you were in it, and then you're out of it, and now you're into therapy. And maybe you can talk about your story and kind of give us a full kind of circle picture of where you are now.
Yep. I'm happy to do that. So it started very young. My very first encounter into that world, stepping into the sex industry. I had no intentions of staying there at this time. It was like I didn't know what I was getting myself into at this moment in time, but it started when I was 16. I was about a month after my 16th birthday, fresh, about to graduate high school. I was graduating very early, and I didn't have enough money for a school trip. I was going to Disneyland. It was the graduation trip for my choir program. And like, that sounds so wholesome. And I decided I was going to make my own way. I was going to figure out how to make my own money. And so I did. I made a Craigslist personals ad back before Craigslist killer documentaries existed. And I met somebody in the middle of the night. It was an extremely sketchy situation. Like, when I recap it in words now, like literally the middle of the night, 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, in an orchard, in this person's vehicle. Like, it was every bit of sketch that you could think of. Did that, made a little bit of money, went to Disneyland with it. And I was really torn in my experience, because on one hand, I thought that I was like, wow, I did something. I found a way. I can make my own money. And at the same time, I was having nightmares. I was having these flashbacks. I was having anxiety, like stuff under the surface that I had no idea how to name it at the time, or what it was, or how to process it at all. And it wasn't until probably 8 years later, when I got out of the industry entirely, that I realized how much trauma I actually incurred just that very first time. So that opened the door. I was spooked away for a little while, and then I stepped back into the industry through stripping when I was 17. I had a fake ID. I knew that if I was going to do anything, I couldn't do it with a social security card, because I didn't have one. I just had the ID. And so you can't walk into a strip club as a 17-year-old. It just doesn't work. And so I found a loophole by doing like the home stripping kind of thing, like bachelor parties, that sort of deal. Did that a little bit. Also, lots of trauma there. Didn't know it at the time until I really could see the impacts later. And then as soon as I was able to, I was 19 years old, I stepped into the real strip club, and I worked there for about 3 years. And then halfway or so through that 3 years, I had a very decent base of regular clients. And I started to see some of those regular clients. At the time, I called them my like golden goose egg clients. They were like the cash cows for me at the time. I started seeing them outside of the club. Then I could be more in control of it. I wasn't risking like getting in trouble for doing something you're not supposed to do at the club, all of that sort of red tape. And I was able to keep all of the money for myself. There was no house fee if I met somebody at a hotel, and so in my very young, very naive logic, it made sense for me to do that. And I was coming from this place of truly thinking and believing that I was empowered in what I was doing. because there's so much social narrative around that. There's like, really, there's two sides of it. Some people are like, oh my God, that's horrible. How did you ever do that? And on the other side, people are like, go women, that's amazing. Women's empowerment. If she wants to do that with her body, she should be able to. And that's where I was at the
Yeah, that
time. But
phase, yeah.
it's, yeah, but now it's a complete 180 in how I see it. And I see it as the opposite of empowerment, because I lived the experience, you know? And so through experience, I learned that that was not the actual truth. Stepping out of the strip club eventually, because in all of my years, 8 years or so in the industry, the strip club environment was the most toxic of all. Just very, very dense,
Yeah,
very low vibration, negative energies, a lot of trauma
a lot
swirling
of
around in that
misogyny, right?
building.
Was there a lot of
Yes,
misogyny? I mean, because the type of people, the type of men, they're not seeing you as a person, right? They're just like seeing you as an
right.
object.
Totally. And it's truly a two-way street. And that's something that I think isn't highlighted enough, that like the internalized misogyny in the women is also at
Mhm.
play. You know, I saw myself as an object. I was willing to be the object because he
Yeah,
was willing to see me as the object. And so it's a
it's a
feedback
true
loop, you
system. Yeah,
know?
it's a feedback loop. Yeah, it's the same
Right.
kind of thing. Like, I'm a musician and we kind of sell ourselves in a different way, but like sometimes
Yeah.
we open ourselves up and we put ourselves out there and we're not always doing what we want. And sometimes we're being
Right.
used, but not to that extent, but it's more like your psyche's being used. But it still can be
Yeah.
damaging because if you
Absolutely.
put yourself into an image and it's not really you and you're doing
Right.
it to sell and it may be part you, but you're kind of selling yourself as this hyper version of yourself.
Yeah.
And that hyper
Totally.
version of yourself is like in the looking glass, it can be just as destructive. And you can see what that happens with musicians as they burn out. You know,
Hmm.
they crash. You get the Hendrix, you get the Morrison, you get the Janis Joplins, because it's self destructive. The same kind of bad behavior. So it's very important for I think for all people who are in any type of industry is to look at what you're doing to yourself, and you think maybe you're empowering yourself, but then you find out you're actually still on the train. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. I'm so glad you mentioned that, because it applies to every single industry where you are willing to self-sacrifice, even in the smallest way, in exchange for whatever it may be. Your boss's approval, the clapping fans in the crowd, somebody to give you a certain amount of money. You know, it's like, at what point are you willing and able to draw that line for yourself of like, I'm not willing to risk my own alignment for this approval or for that external validation, whatever it may be, whatever form it may be in. You know, so I was it's an environment that requires dissociation. You have to unplug from yourself in some way or another in order to endure it. And then, just like in the music industry, that's where all of the substance abuse comes in, all of the partying, the blacking out, like, because you need to be numbed in some way in order to continue it for so long once you get to a certain point. So I had my fill of the strip club. I couldn't do the environment anymore. And so I finally stepped out of it completely. And then I was full time seeing men. Um, at the time, I would say on my own time, but really it was their time, you know.
Mhm.
And um, that's what I did for another handful of years after that. And in all of that, I was dating. I was in serious relationships. It wasn't casual at all. And so that had, as you can expect, a lot of difficulty. There was a lot of trial and error, a lot of
Difficult.
pain on both
Yeah.
ends, mine and theirs, and it's a really hard thing to navigate. And now I see it so clearly. It's hard to navigate because it shouldn't be being done. But um, my very last long-term relationship, when before I left the industry, was 3 years long, and it really served as a mirror for me. Eventually, I woke up to this truth. It was a mirror for me of how, like, on the floor my self-worth was, because he was constantly disapproving. He was constantly rejecting me in these subtle minor ways, left and right, while we were choosing to stay together because we both had wounding. It was a very much a trauma bond. And
Mhm.
I finally woke up to, like, oh, he's disapproving of me and I'm choosing to stay because I'm disapproving of myself on some level. Why is
Yeah.
that the case? And I
I mean, that
started
realistic
to
is that
heal.
like codependency? Was there a codependency on both parts? Because like he maybe was
Totally.
disapproving, but he probably had issues that drew him to you, and you were drawn to him. And then you can this
Yep.
thing, it's like it's not a positive relationship. Because I always kind of brought up this idea. People talk about falling in love, right? And the idea of
Uh-huh.
the idea of falling is kind of codependent from the start, right? Like if
Right.
I came up with this idea like what if you ever thought that you had a right to ascend in love instead of
Yeah.
falling, that you ascend because you're not tearing each other down or one person's over another, that you're both equally feeling like spiritually lifted, right? You know,
Right.
like psychically lifted, romantically lifted, and most people don't get into that. They go into the kind of codependency. I can go to my grandparents and my parents. They had situations where they did things because like their parents wanted them to, or society wanted them to, or the church wanted them to, and you have people that got together that they really didn't fit, but you know
Hmm.
because you got pregnant at 18, or because or you were expected to do it. You come out of the
Yep.
military, you marry your girlfriend, and they
Right.
really aren't the right people. So I think a lot of times people didn't really live for their happiness. They live for
Yeah.
like expectations from other people, or even expectations they built up that aren't realistic.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I'm glad you said that in the very beginning about the authentic happiness thing, because that's like, it has to come down to you being authentic for you and nobody else in every area of your life if you're going to be happy, but especially relationships. Because, and this is a visual I like to use. So whoever's watching this on video, you see it. If you're listening to MP3, I'll describe it to the best of my ability. So it's like if you have two fingers, you stick them out in front of you, like they're both pointing up. That's one person, the other person. If you come together like this, you're parallel to each other. You're not leaning on each other in any sort of trauma bonded, codependent way. You could consider that a healthy relationship. You're complementing each other's lives. But most relationships are like this. They make like a
Yeah,
teepee shape where you're leaning on each other, and then you're stuck there. You become each other's crutch. And when one person starts to heal, you start to stand up straight. The other person either falls on their face, or, and that's where a breakup happens, and most people will not heal in a trauma bonded relationship because they for some reason feel responsible for the other person. They don't want to be the reason that the person goes through that heartbreak when they heal. And so they stay because this is comfortable. You support each other literally like crutches, even if it's unhappy. But it also, when you heal in that kind of a relationship, it creates the opportunity for the other person to stand up on their own as well. And so I'm a firm believer in the deepest amount of healing that can be done for relationships can be done inside of them, because when you are able to really take radical responsibility for yourself and your partner's willing to do the same at the same time, side by side, you can create the most powerful relationship dynamic. But it's few and far between because there is so much trauma and so much stuff that needs to be healed on an individual level. It can be hard to do that together.
yeah, it's very difficult. I mean, I've been in a marriage for 20 years, and it's hard work. And I've gone through like cancer. My wife's gone through. We've
Mhm.
had like between medical issues, and your kids can have issues, and a lot of times it's like the whole thing about people have these ideas about relationships, but a lot of things in life is like it's a lot of hard work, and sometimes not the fantasy of these romantic concepts of these
Mhm.
idealized relationships. Life is hard, and a lot of times it's not it's not like fantasy island, it's not the love boat. It's not always
Right.
gonna be perfect. It's not gonna be what's fantasized, and you have to kind of live with reality and then find your like, oh, islands of, oh, you can, because not everything's always great, and so
Yeah.
I think that people have this kind of expectation. They want instant gratification. And
Yes.
I think a
Yes.
relationship is a long-term thing where there's gonna be a lot of phases where it's not like dating all the time. It's never gonna be like that
Mhm.
all the time. And then people will like
Mhm.
get disappointed. And how do you kind of navigate that? Oh, that disappointment a lot of times is because of you. Like you could
Right.
go through 10 people, 20 people, and you're still gonna end up to the same place because it's actually you that's gonna cause
Yep.
that not to happen right.
Yeah, you just date the same person with a different face again and again and again and again because you are the thing that's a match for that type of partner. And so that can be really confronting for people when you really realize that, like, at any given point in time, you are a match for what's going on in your life. That can be confronting and painful because then it's like, oh shit, I have to take responsibility for all. There's a lot of stuff to clean up. But it can also be really liberating and really freeing when it's like, I'm the one that gets to level up here, and then consequently everything in my life will level up too. It's like once you heal from something enough, you look back and it's like, wow, how did I ever do that thing in the past? And you've come so far, it's like you're a completely new person. Everybody can do that, and I believe that totally.
Yeah, I mean, because I go talk about, like, I had a cancer at age 27, and it was like a radical
Mm,
thing in my life. And I decided I was gonna try to get on that road to happiness because I was creating ceilings for myself. And so
mm,
I got married, had a child. I was like not scared. We went and lived in Japan for 2 years. I basically got rid of a lot of fear because if you almost die,
amazing.
when you almost die and you break out of it, like people who come out of like addictive things or create a bad like illnesses, and then you actually take steps. I was able to kind of like I would had been painfully shy, and now I'm a podcaster, I'm a musician. I would have never, my old me before cancer, I would have never do I'd never do what I do now. And it really
Mm,
sometimes you have to radically put yourself in a place where I was super uncomfortable when I first started doing the stuff I was doing, but now I feel like I'm not that painfully shy 24-year-old that I had been before the cancer. And I think that's
yeah,
where people kind of have to go through that crucible. They figure out who they are and how to get beyond your own glass ceilings you put on yourself.
yeah. That's amazing. That's such an incredible story, and like I'm clapping for you. That's so cool that you were able to really like turn your pain into your power. That's fantastic. And I think that so many people can learn from that and can leverage that, that like you don't have to touch the stove to know that it's hot. You don't have to burn yourself to learn the lesson if you're willing to be a student. If you're willing to like learn from other people's mistakes, learn from what other people have learned and accept that wisdom and use it yourself without necessarily having to go through something that breaks you before you're willing to change. I've been saying this a lot. Don't wait until you're sick to get healthy. Don't wait until you're overweight to get the gym membership. Don't wait until your relationship is broken to start working on yourself. Like the more proactive you can be, the more in control, the more happy, the more authentic your life can be.
Yeah, because I felt like I time I was 27 and I had because it's like I had put all these roadblocks. I had all these and I had listened to people tell me what I couldn't do and what I could do. And
Hmm.
I think it's like, there's like a childhood trauma that kind of keeps you in a box. And,
Yep.
I had like maybe more like a psychological trauma from my parents, the certain thing I won't get into, but a lot of it kept me in a box, kept me from thinking how things were possible. And then the
Hmm.
cancer kind of broke that and said, well, I don't have to pay attention to that. I don't have to listen to that person. I can actually listen
Hmm.
to myself and get beyond what they're telling me I could do or what I can't do. And I think a lot of times people are stuck in that because they don't know how to get out of it. So I think you
Yeah.
become a therapist, like, is a lot of it, from what I've suspected, at least for me, it was my childhood issues. Is that what kind of breaks down that people have to find that inner child and kind of have a conversation and figure out what's going on?
Absolutely, 100%. And the inner child work is like such a central part of the work that I do with people, because we've all heard it, like the super and monumental importance of that 0 to 7 age range. It's so important because we don't have the part of our brain that has the capacity for logic. And so when dad comes home every day and says, I'll play with you tomorrow, I'll play with you tomorrow, I'll play with you tomorrow, and just blows you off, it doesn't have to be like a massive abuse, but it can
Mm,
still massively traumatize a child because they don't have the part of their brain developed that says, that's not really about me. And so
mhm.
everything you experience in those first handful of years, it's like a footprint on how you develop. It just stamps you, and then that's what shapes you. And so you learn through the most subtle things, everything you hear, everything you see, everything you feel, that you are worthy of somebody's attention or you're not. You're worthy of somebody's time or you're not. You are empowered to trust yourself or you're not. In every single little tiny subtle piece of your childhood, all of that is formed. Sure, you can endure abuse or trauma or whatever as a teenager, as an adult, but for the most part, like 90% plus of how you suffer as an adult, in my opinion, and what I've seen and learned about myself and clients, is it's going to be stemming from something you learned about life in those beginning years. Totally.
Yeah, because it really, I just found a lot of my family and friends and cousins all kind of grew up with like family structures that basically didn't really look at the arts as something that was important, right? And didn't think that
Mm,
creativity, like you need to go do this, you need to join the military, you need to do that. They kind of foo-foo anybody trying to do anything else. Well, that's not real. That's like
right.
waste of time. There was, I had this really driving need to do art. And what I tried to do with my daughter, she's an artist, is I didn't put any expectations. She's going to art school. She's doing art totally 100%. And because I said, I'm not going to do what my grandparents and grandparents didn't look at that as being important. And I understand why, because
Hmm.
they want you to be successful. They want to be a starving artist on the street. And I understand why they didn't see it, because they didn't have the resources to fund that. So people don't have
Right.
resources. They're going to try to tell you like you can't do it. But it's kind of kills your dreams when you're type of person that wants to do art, and then people
Hmm.
discourage, and they don't realize how much damage they do when they just like foo that or act like it's not important. But I think it's really important to have a sense of spirituality too. Maybe you can talk about that, because I
Hmm.
think some people might get a sense of spirituality, but it might be kind of top down, and then you got to find like your own relationship with spirituality to actually really self actualize.
Yeah, yeah. And I love that you took a different approach with your daughter consciously, knowing how certain things impacted you and then chose to do it different. And that's one of the biggest things I focus on when it comes to the inner child work, because so much can come up. It's like, damn, my parents did this, my parents did that. But it's not about the blame ever. That's not going to move anything forward, because we're always doing the best we can with what we have and what we know how to do. And so that's where their parents, everybody's parents, were coming from. And if it left some unhelpful marks, that's okay. It's not about blaming them, but as an adult, it's your responsibility to handle it. So on the spirituality piece, I was raised like the opposite of religion, the opposite of spirituality. Like absolutely no religion, no structure, nothing like that in my household growing up. And I was taught, not, it wasn't a big conversation because it wasn't important. I was raised by a single dad. Mostly it wasn't important to him to talk about this kind of stuff, spirituality, all of that. But if there ever was anything he taught me, it was that, like, you're alive and then you die, period. Like that was kind of it. There was no extra piece about faith or
That's it.
hope or like anything. And so that was how
Yeah.
I identified for a long time. I was like, I'm an atheist, all that shit's stupid, that's not real. Like, you believe in a guy in the sky? I would say like the rudest, most ridiculous things to people. And then I had my own very like earth shattering, what I call now my spiritual awakening, when I was 19. My grandpa died, and that was my very first like big loss in my life, my first true big experience of grief. And I was so like I could not be consoled for probably 2 years. Just this crying all the time, and in private mostly, but just so broken about it and numbing in all these different ways. And I didn't have any idea that it could ever get better. Like I was at such odds with life. Like, how is this it? How is this all there is? Like I was furious and heartbroken all at the same time. And I knew that it wasn't the end. Like there would be times when I would have moments where I would like feel his spirit. I would feel him. And that led me into having a medium session a couple years after he passed. And the amount of closure and just like closure really is the word. Just I was like, it was like I could exhale finally, like, wow, okay, I feel insanely better. It's like worlds were moved off my shoulders when I was able to connect with him in spirit. And it just really opened the door for me to start to look into that kind of stuff for myself. And so then I had another massive thing that I would call my bigger spiritual awakening. It was the second biggest loss of my life. And it really shattered me in a billion different pieces. And it was so painful that like no matter how I healed through it, I was gonna come out a completely different version of myself. You know, one of those very like life altering moments. And that's where my spirituality, like my own, I believe everybody's a psychic. Everybody is a psychic. You know, you have that little voice in your head, that little intuition. Like we are all spiritually tapped in. It's just a matter of if you allow yourself to trust yourself or not, if you allow yourself to truly be guided or not. And that's when I really started to get quiet and churn inside. I started having a building a really consistent, very strong meditation practice. I started working with spiritual healers, and coming from like a total heathen household, like totally atheist, totally nothing is beyond this world, to now where I'm like talking to my ancestors and you know, people that I've never even met, and having like a spiritual connection with past pets and like things like that. um
Well, I
it's
think
just it's just a completely different way of life. And I think that, I mean, there's been studies done on this, left and right, that compare groups of people who have no source of faith, whatever that means to them, and groups of people who do, whether it's spirituality, religion, whatever, but something that they believe in after this life, bigger than the 3D. People who go through hard times in that atheist category are like so much more likely to crumble under life's hard times, because when you're grounded and believe that this is all there is, and then it's hard, like what's there to get you through that? You know, how are
yeah,
you going to
yeah,
believe it
probably
can be
more,
better?
yeah, probably more likely to like, do self-harm or leave the world because you're not
Yeah.
looking at like that there's something redeemable.
Right.
I would grew up in a kind of Baptist Protestant, well, Baptist Protestant like Christian concepts, and
Hmm.
then later I got into Buddhism. I got into like
Yeah, me too.
Nichiren Daishonin Japanese form of Buddhism, and also
Cool.
I'm part Cherokee and Blackfoot, and so I
Mm,
got really into a lot of stories about my great grandmother who was a full blooded Blackfoot, and
mm,
the spirituality. Because I like to mountain bike, I like to hike, and I always felt I had a connection to nature because the animals would come up to me, and I'd kind of be able to. They would just deer and foxes and things, and I would just be able to connect, and I didn't understand it,
yeah.
and I kind of felt like it was kind of my Native American culture that I could kind of feel Gaia. I get out there and I could feel it. And as a musician,
Hmm.
I felt it too. That like a lot of my inspiration comes from like the muse, where it comes from the universe. I always like
Yeah.
reading about Hendrix. That he was a Cherokee, and he used to talk about how it would just come in. It was coming from the universe. It was coming from like the
Hmm.
muse. It's coming from the ancestors. That's where he felt like he was getting his inspiration. And a lot of musicians we naturally kind of tap into that we feel
Mm,
that this thing because how we're able to we can kind of channel it, and you get
hmm.
better when you let it go. You let go of your thinking and you kind of go with it, and it's a really cool like healing. Like a lot of creative people, we feel the art we do it kind of heals us because it
Hmm.
like, kind of it's a cathartic type of thing that we can go through it, and we take the pain and we turn it into art, and it's a useful thing. I like art therapy. I think like people try to take people who aren't artists and show them that how artists actually handle things. but
Right.
but
Yeah, that's so awesome, and I relate so much. I spent the last 2 years studying a lineage of Tibetan Buddhist Tantra, and so that is where a lot of my spirituality lies right now. And
hmm
it's a 5 chakra system with that specific lineage. It's a 5 chakra system where each of the chakras is represented by an element, and so like fire, earth, space, air, water. And so that has tapped me even more into like indigenous past
yeah,
life memories and all that kind of stuff, and
yeah,
just really feeling the life of the earth that's underneath our feet. You know, there's so much talk about like, oh, I don't want to be here, what is the earth coming to? There's so much
still here.
magic
Yeah,
here.
it's still here,
Yeah,
and the
it's
earth
like we
will
just need
still
to
be
pay
here
attention. Right.
beyond what humans do to it because it will heal itself. Whether
Yes.
we're still here
Yes.
when it does it is a whole nother thing. But the earth has a way of regenerating itself. That's why, volcanoes and all kinds of
Hmm.
other things that can happen, and Gaia can actually come back to Pangea. And there's all kinds of things the earth can kind of restructure itself to be in different forms that it was
Yeah.
in the past, it can become again. Whether we're the
Exactly.
species that's on it, it depends on us. Uh,
Right.
but
Right.
so it's like it's not the end. the world is still there. It's like if you think the whole world is only based on humans, there's everything else that's there. There's microbes, there's insects, there's all kinds of animals that could come back to be prominent. So I mean
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of like what people have to understand. Like you're thinking, people get into narrow-minded thinking, and I think the problem is people need to have more holistic thinking. But holistic thinking is not just putting down the lane that you're not in, right? Then
Right.
recognizing that somebody has valid points in that other lane, right? And I think that's in relationships is the more holistic you can be and not like sticking to your guns. I think you can have a better time. I think as I've grown up, I've become more open, and then having my daughter, my wife outnumbering me.
Right.
I've had to, like, had an adjustment to my thinking.
Uh-huh. That's so funny. I love that. And yeah,
Yeah,
it's like we've heard in like football movies and stuff, like the team is only as strong as its weakest link. And I believe that that's true in inside of every single one of us, mind, body, spirit. Which part of you are you weak in? Where can you be strengthened? And that is going to speak to like your holistic experience of how great your life is or isn't.
yeah, I think a lot of times with relationships, it's like you got this fantasy world or the idealized world. Everybody's got this idealized romantic novel vision of love, right?
Yeah.
Whether, guys meant, will say that they do, but they do, right? They'll
Yeah.
have this idealized version of a woman that they want or a partner they
Yeah.
want or whoever. And
Uh-huh.
I think, people aren't honest with that. Like, so if you're like not honest with what you want and you expect the other person to complete you, and then you never
Hmm.
really talk to them about what that would mean, then how are
Hmm.
you ever going to get there if you never talk?
Right. Yeah, and I speak with my clients about this all the time. Unspoken rules and unconscious expectations. And this could be as simple as like, where do you keep the butter in your house? Does it go in the fridge? Does it go on the counter? Like little teeny tiny things, as small as the condiments in your home, how you make the bed, who does the laundry, those types of things, all the way up to the more important things. When do we have kids? How do we raise them? All of that sort of stuff. Like, we are all coming from the very first university we all go to when it comes to relationships is the household we grew up in. Whether that was good, bad, helpful, unhelpful, it doesn't matter. That's what sets the tone for what we expect in our household in the future. And when we don't talk about those things in the most detailed ways, we run into so much unnecessary conflict that I think can be avoidable when people take the time to understand what are my expectations, what am I fantasizing about this relationship and how it's going to go, what do I really need and want from you, and getting clear on those things so they can be communicated, because if they're not, then they'll probably not be met.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing. I remember with my father, he passed away from Alzheimer's, back in
Mm,
2017. But my mom and my dad, they had all kinds of issues just because they didn't talk it out. And being I was a sociology major, and I came home and I lived with my parents after college because I didn't have money for a while. And I just sat down with them one day and I said, "Hey, you guys are having all these problems because you never talk. You
uh-huh.
go off to your corners and you never really say." So I said, I told my dad, "Why don't you tell mom what you really want?" And my mom, "Why don't you tell dad what you really want? Then don't just talk about, who's going to do the trash, who's going to do the lawn, who's going to do, have a real conversation for a chance." Because now I'm 23 at home and I don't see you doing that. I've been here for like 3 years. I don't hear you actually having conversations. And then
Mm,
they were so surprised about what they actually said to each other. And they eventually, started. I said, "Hey, you guys need to just go to Maine or go on vacation, go somewhere, get
mm-hmm.
out the house and do something. You go and have a date. Go." And I had to kind of instigate to get them to think about it. But it was just as like, because people they were in a pattern and they were just going to keep on doing it over and over and just never get out of it.
Yep. And that's true for all of our patterns, whether they're keeping us happy or keeping us unhappy. They will continue to play out until we bring them into the light and choose to do something about it consciously. So that's super awesome that you're able to support your parents as an adult like that. That's phenomenal.
Well, I think sometimes we people try to put on a face. When I was a
Yeah.
kid, if you feel like your parents are they got a mask on to a certain extent, they
Mhm.
go off and they show you only so much. And then
Yeah.
eventually you get older and you get some knowledge in your head. And then suddenly I was like, oh, I read about all these Francis Fanon and like Wretched of the Earth and masks and all these
Uh-huh.
ideas. Oh, I'm getting a little dangerous with these concepts. So it's like I could start, having conversations with people in my family and my uncle and stuff, and then they challenge them, and they're like, "What? What are you talking about? And the old timers were like, "Oh, what are you saying? This new age stuff." Like, no, you need to think. You need to like,
Right.
get beyond what you're comfortable.
Yeah.
And I think that being an artist, we kind of push points. That's the whole
Mhm.
point of being an artist is you kind of push boundaries is kind of necessary, in art to
Mhm.
kind of figure out where you're going to be as an artist. And I think I like to apply it everywhere, So I got this idea of expansive, right? I got this
Mhm.
thing in my head. I don't want to get locked into one genre. So then I don't want to get locked into one kind of topic or one kind of lane. And I kind of take it from music and apply it to podcasting, apply it to work, apply it to life, apply it to everything. And it's kind of like a Buddhist idea too, just like looking at the whole universe. He has a universal
Yeah.
view. It's like a holistic
Mhm.
view. And it
Mhm.
keeps you from getting stuck because you start to like question yourself, question your own
Mhm.
decisions. Don't just question other people's decisions. Questions the decisions that you're making too.
Yeah. The whatever's going on around us that we're judging so quickly is always a reflection of what's going on inside, and it's hard for people to really grip that sometimes because sometimes it means there's a lot to work on, but it's the truth, and so it's like if you see the world as bad, you might have some stuff to set inside of you that feels bad. If you see the world as good, you might be feeling pretty good about yourself. It's always going to be a reflection. It's life is, I've said this a lot, life is a window. I mean, life is not a window, it's a mirror. It's showing you what's going on inside of you and how connected you really are to everything around you.
Yeah, because the pessimism, and people being kind of melancholy as a lifestyle, it could be like a scene type of thing, and that's cool at the coffee shop,
Right.
but that's cool at the scene at the club, but like, is that really the best way to live when, if you get out there being a cancer survivor, you'd like to wake up the next day and you're thankful. And then you see
Hmm.
somebody who's kind of like a melodramatic kind of goth, and they're like, "Oh, I'm down on the downside." I'm like, "Okay." But, like, think about, like, that bird singing or the wind blowing or the scent of the forest is like you're missing out on the things that are good. And, to
Hmm.
only focus on the dark, and that's cool for your poetry, but, you can end up being where Morrison went. You can end up being where Hendrix went, if you get too into that, there's a consequence,
Yeah.
so you have to kind of like even in art, you can look at it as, oh, do you want to be like one of those 28, 27 club, or do you want to be
Right.
able to be around like Dylan, who's still here?
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
You know?
Yeah, it's like that balance of learning how to use the pain to create your art maybe or as part of your muse, but not identifying with it as life, as the way life is or has to be. And it's like, um, what was I gonna say? I don't know, I forgot, it just left my mind, but anyways, yeah, that balance, like, you don't wanna deny any side of it, that's, like, the toxic positivity side where it's like, "Nope, that's not happening, everything is just great," and that's not necessarily true, there's hard times, there's bad stuff, but when we
Mhm.
over-identify with one or the other, I think it really, like, robs us of the most holistic experience that we're here to have.
Yeah, I think balance is the whole thing, in order to be
Mhm.
to kind of go through the day is like, yeah, there's going to be rough patches, there's going to be things that are hard, the COVID is hard.
Mhm.
COVID, as a musician, they took away like a large leg of how we make money. And we had to
Yeah.
figure out other ways like podcasting, like like licensing, like other things, right? So things I could do without
Mhm.
having to show up at the show. And so,
Mhm.
people who get stuck, like all I know how to do is tour. And then they got all depressed. It's like, 'cause look, they just said, well, you got to figure something else out. You can't like if you can't tour, You can't tour. So what else are you going to do? And there's people got stuck and like, oh, I'm done. It's like, you're not done. It's
Mm-hmm.
like, you have to like be creative. You're a creative person.
Yeah.
Like, figure it out.
Right. You can't write songs and then just quit when something gets hard in life. Like you got
Yeah,
to keep creating in all areas.
you got
Yeah.
to figure out how to do it. And then, this whole avenue of podcasting, which I love, is like, I only did like, I was narrow and I only talked to emerging and independent artists. Then eventually
Mm-hmm.
that avenue kind of hit a plateau. And then I said, well, you know
Mm,
what? I need to talk to other people. And people said, well, then I said, well, how am I going to, how people say, oh, how is a musician type of podcaster going to talk to other people? I said, because you just start doing
mm-hmm.
it. So there
Mm-hmm.
was a wall, but other podcasts, oh, you can't be a music podcast and talk to a life coach. It's like, why not? Because I believe like John Lennon was a big life coach. Marvin Gaye was a
Mm-hmm.
big life coach. They inspire people to, what's going on. They challenge the environmentalism. John Lennon talking about, bad peace. What are you talking about? The musicians are life coaches. So I started to say,
Yeah.
well, why can't I talk to a life coach? Because musicians talk about are mentors to large amounts of people. And so then I was able to get my foot in the door and go beyond where people say, "Oh, stay in that lane." I don't have to stay in that lane. And it's just a
Mm-hmm.
kind of like a picture, like you don't have to get stuck because of other people's expectations or what they say is right. You know,
Yeah.
you, you can get
Yeah.
beyond.
Yeah, and then just tying it into that spirituality piece, like I think the more connected you are to that divine oneness, that universal truth, that universal consciousness in whatever ways you connect with it best, the easier it is to kind of tune out the naysayers and to tune out the negativity because you know that there's something greater supporting you. You know that, you're not living life, your life isn't as mundane as it might feel in any given moment with any given challenge because there's always going to be something bigger and greater that comes and you cannot expect that. Like we're always co-creating with the universe. We do have a say in how we design our lives, but there's also this totally wildly unexpectable piece of it that we're just along for the ride for. And so the more connected we are to that, I think it's easier to surrender to those hard times and push through them because you trust that it's not going to stay that way forever.
So I think one of your points and the questions you like to be asked or are ready to answer is like, how can men and women understand each other better? And I think that's an ongoing hourly process in the day. I think it's something that you have to learn every day how to interact because everybody's
Yeah.
different. Every person you meet is different. And so whatever worked with one individual doesn't work with the next all the time.
Hmm.
There's similar ideas about being respectful. That's going to
Yeah.
probably work with everybody, but people's individual personalities, you have to kind of learn what triggers people, what doesn't trigger people, and
Yeah.
not to be the kind of person that's going to be triggering people unnecessarily.
Yes. Yes. So there's two pieces to this answer for me. And also, I just realized right now that I have a call in 15 minutes. So
Oh,
if we'll
okay,
wrap up in the next five or so, then that's totally cool with me.
that's
And
cool.
I would love to have like a part two or something. If you do want to
Yeah,
do
in the
that, that'd
future,
be
yeah, we can
fun.
do that. Yeah, we can do that
Yeah.
definitely.
Yeah. So that we're not like cutting it short. But um, for the men and women to really like bridge that gap, couple things come to mind. Number one, and this is universally applied to every single buddy, doesn't matter what genitals you have. Personal responsibility will set you free. Like when you are willing to see every single emotional experience as your own and not somebody else's fault and not somebody else's job to fix, then everything that you experience in relationship becomes a collaboration and not something that the other person is being made wrong for or supposed to fix for you. Because as soon as you put blame outside of yourself like that, then you're powerless to solving your own problem.
Mhm.
And so as long as both people are rooted in personal responsibility, I think a lot of headway can be made with whatever the issues are that come up. And then for men and women specifically, I think it's really helpful for each person to understand the collective wounding of those different genders and how they are different. For men, there's so much collective wounding around not being allowed to have emotions, not being allowed to have certain needs and desires and wants that women can have freely and openly. Men have them too. We're both humans, but men are kind of put in the dark with certain things. They're not allowed to be as emotional. They're not allowed to feel as much pain, etc. And so for a woman to be able to understand that and empathize and look at herself and say, where am I not allowing my man to have space to feel things? Where am I not giving him permission to have a human experience? I think that creates a lot more space for compassion and connection. And then on the other side, for the woman, there's such a collective wounding around self-worth when it comes to like the objectification and stuff that we see in our culture. Like driving down the street, you see 100 billboards on your way to work of women in their bras and underwear. You know, like it's something we're taught in our society that women can commoditize themselves and it's okay and it's normal. And so where are you performing in a certain way in your relationships in order to get the love that you might not truly believe you deserve? And then as a man, where can you support your woman in like looking at some of those deeper layers of like why she does what she does in the relationship? Does she feel worthy of your love? And assuring her that she is, and then helping her to claim that for herself. And yeah, I think both of those can really help each other understand.
Yeah, I think men have to also stop like gaslighting.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
because they're always kind of putting it like they're your sexuality isn't dependent on your woman or your man.
Right.
Like you shouldn't be
Yes.
putting that on the other person, right? You probably
Yes.
need to handle that yourself and figure out where you are. You know,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of times people are they got this like idealized version. Oh, this idealized woman's going to come in and be my wife, my homemaker, my sexual partner. She's going to save me. And I
Yeah.
think that's a bad premise to come in on. You know,
Yeah.
you probably should be like, is she actually your equal, or are you trying to put her in a subject more subversive, like Ozzy and Harriet leaving a beaver kind of situation? You put her in this kind of
Mm-hmm.
ideal, or do you look at her like, could she be like Mary Tyler Moore? Is she that
Mm-hmm.
independent woman that can have her own job and doesn't depend on you? Right? She doesn't
Right.
need you to be complete. She can be complete on her own, but she happens to have a parallel life and she wants to talk to you. She wants to be with you because you're equals intellectually and you can connect. But you don't have to go
Mm-hmm.
suddenly take her away from anything. She can still have everything she was doing. You know, you
Mm-hmm.
don't have to like put her up, on a pedestal and objectify her or put her below it and objectify
Mm-hmm.
her because it's the
Right.
problem. You go on Instagram, you go on all social media, and all the women are being objectified, and if a lot of these influencers objectifying themselves, along with the musicians doing the same thing, and all these entertainers just like putting up these like these images that are not helpful to young people developing because they've
Mm-hmm.
given them like bad expectation or bad goals to reach for.
Yeah.
Is that really you? Or is that somebody you thought you were being you? Like when we first talked, you thought you were being independent and you were falling
Mm-hmm.
into misogyny and you thought you were actually controlling it and you weren't fully
Yeah.
controlling it. And if
Yeah.
you see what's going on the social media, you can kind of put people into that mindset.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love the way you said that. Like, and it's on both sides of the street, men and women both. Nobody's coming to save you. And so which parts of you unconsciously below the surface are projecting voids to be filled by your partner that really are your responsibility to complete that inside. It's an inside job, for you to feel whole. Your partner gets to be a complement to that, not someone that's supposed to plug the holes.
Well, I know you have to go, but I think we can have a part two definitely because I think that what we like to do here is we have a big audience of all types of people that are interested in just expansion of the mind, soul,
Mm-hmm.
body, and spirit. And so this is like in that spirit, we would definitely want you to come back. And I'd like everybody to check out your Instagram, Hannah Spanky, and we have that. Will be clickable, and we'll be on a bunch of other platforms later today. And I'll send you the rest. We do a link that you send to your whole audience where we are right now on Facebook, Twitch, and YouTube will be there, plus Spotify and Apple and our website. So we'll send that to you later today. We'll be fully published. And thank you for being on the show. It was really great, insightful conversation.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. Sorry, my last little ding right there. Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed this conversation, and yeah, I would love to come back. And I'll be sure to share all of this as soon as I get the email from you.
Okay, thank you. Have a good
Thank
day.
you. Bye. You too.